Welcome to Sunday Cooking with Barbara and Kansa, where cooking meets glam. On today's episode, we are making Ghanaian stovetop jollof, Ghanaian salad, and suyagoat. But before we begin, make sure you hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode, comment down below, and most importantly, share this video. I'm super excited to start my food blogging and cooking journey on YouTube. I would love to introduce myself. My name is Barbara and Kansa, and I am a lifestyle blogger and a content creator, and I love sharing all things my life and style. And one thing that I truly love is food. I am a foodie. Who else is a foodie here watching this video? Comment down below and tell me what you love cooking and eating. Now, before I go ahead and showcase my step-by-step tutorial, I just want to share that I just recently started learning how to cook. So if I can do this, so can you. There's no shame in my game. I literally just learned how to peel a potato not too long ago. So I'm really excited to have you on board and just grow with each and every single one of you and showcase that you can absolutely share your gifts and talents. Believe in yourself first, and the entire world will also believe in you as well. So if you aren't already, make sure you're following me on Instagram, Mrs. Barbara and Kansa, on TikTok, Barbara and Kansa, as well as YouTube, Barbara and Kansa. Looking forward to having you join my community and joining yours as well. So join with me on this amazing journey as I share with you international dishes bi-weekly, every other Sunday. And another thing that I want to share is that my mother really inspired me to start my entire Sunday Cooking with Barbara and Kansa episodes, because growing up in my household, Sunday dinners were huge. Comment down below if you recall Sunday dinner, whether it be at your own household or your grandparents or your friends' households, and just having that fun time, you know, bonding, marinating dishes the night before, and having that grand feast on Sundays. So from my kitchen to yours, let us go ahead and start my very first YouTube episode. First, you are going to need jasmine rice. Now for this recipe, you are going to need 5 cups of rice. You are also going to need, and again, preference, what I use for my stovetop Ghanaian jollof rice are these sliced stewed tomatoes. Now I will be using 2 cans. Now each can is about 796 milliliters, and that is equivalent to about 2 cups each. So 4 cups of tomatoes. Once I drain the water and blend it out thoroughly, it equals to 4 full cups of these sliced stewed tomatoes. For my Ghanaian jollof rice recipe as well too, I use bell peppers, red and green. I prefer using red onions. Yellow onions, again, preference, but I find that the red onions has a lot of flavor to them. I also use crayfish Maggi cubes for my stovetop jollof rice, fresh garlic, ginger, Habanero peppers, again, spice tolerance. I love spicy food, so I do love to use that in abundance. Again, it's all preference for you as well. I also implement salt and pepper, oil as well for when I'm making the stovetop jollof rice, as well as implementation of nutmeg and curry powder as well for the stew. Tomato paste as well. So these are the ingredients that I use for the stovetop jollof rice. And then I will go ahead and explain the suyagoat afterwards, but I'll just focus on, first things first, making the stew for the jollof rice. Let's get started. Okay, so to help expedite the cooking process of your stew for the jollof rice, what I do is with each sliced stew tomato can, I dump it into my strainer and strain out all of the water that's inside the cans. The more water your tomatoes have, the longer it takes to cook. So to speed up the process, I drain out all of the water and then I place it into the blender for the blender to make it into a puree. So now that the water has been strained, out, it'll take about 2 hours. So an hour each can, okay? You wanna cook your tomatoes down so that way the sour taste goes away and it speeds up the entire process. So what I do here is I strain out all of the water that came inside the cans of these tomatoes, and then I blend them until it becomes a puree, and then I boil them down on the stove for 2 hours. So the tomatoes have now been blended. I put them in the blender for about a minute, and now I'm going to put it over the stove for 2 hours for it to thoroughly cook, and then we'll start the stew process. So as I mentioned earlier, I absolutely love red onions, not just because it has a pretty color, but it has such an amazing taste. And when it comes to the red onions, the best part of it is that I'm going to use it both for the base of my stew and also as a blend for when I steam my goat meat. So what I do first is for blending, I would just chop up my onion into about, let's say, 4 big pieces each. You just want to chop up your onions so that it's easy for it to blend in the blender. So that's 1 onion there for the base of my stew. And I'm going to use a total of 2 onions, and I'm going to split it between so on average I would use 2 onions here. And this is what I'm going to use for the base of my stew as well as for the goat meat broth. And this will go into the blender. And then with these onions here, I'm going to finely slice them. And this is what I'm going to use when I start off the base of the stew. So you want to thinly slice your onions, okay? You want to thinly slice them so that way when it's frying in the oil, they become translucent, okay? So this is the ideal size for when you are thinly slicing your onions to do the base of your stew. And then this is the size that you would chop your onions. Again, this is how I chop them, but this is the easier way for me to blend my onions. So what you can see here is I have a variation of red bell peppers, green bell peppers, chopped up garlic, a little bit of ginger, 1 habanero pepper, and the red onions. So prior to blending these pieces, I like to roast them in the oven for about 8 minutes on broil, so about 450 to 500 degrees to speed up the process. And this way, when you bake or broil these produce items, it gives your stew a smoky flavor as well as the goat. So I will be sharing this between the goat and the jollof rice. So I have here like less than a quarter piece of the green and red bell pepper. I have 1 piece of garlic from the cloves. I have a quarter piece of ginger, and I would say I have 1 whole onion that I'm going to roast. Now I'm gonna go ahead and show you how I season and most importantly, clean the goat meat. So I cannot stress the importance of cleaning your meat. And I'm gonna go ahead and share with you how I clean my meat in particular. So with this goat meat here, I have about 1 pound of goat meat. And what I use to clean my meat is fresh lemon, as well as vinegar. These 2 items are my go-to. And not only does it thoroughly clean your meat, but it gives it like a fresh scent as well. And not to worry at all, once you thoroughly clean your meat with the lemon and vinegar, you thoroughly rinse it out with water. So you will not taste the lemon nor the vinegar. It just to ensure that your goat meat is cleaned, because it can be messy. Sometimes you can find hair as well. This may be too much information, but this is why it's very, very important for you to thoroughly clean your meat, and I will show you how I go about it. So what I do is with this freshly squeezed lemon, half of the lemon, I squeeze it onto the goat meat. I go in and I open it up sometimes. I squeeze it, squeeze it. Okay, so this is half lemon. And then obviously the bigger the quantity, then I would say more lemon you would use. And then I sprinkle a little bit of vinegar onto the goat meat, and right away you can see blood as well. And I use my hands and I go into it. I go into the meat, I make sure I check my meat thoroughly inside to ensure there's no hairs, as well as pieces of fat as well too. You would, and again, some people like to keep their fat on their goat meat, preference as well. So again, I just go in thoroughly here. And I leave it in, soaking in the vinegar and lemon for about 30 seconds, and then I rinse it off with water. And that is how you clean your goat meat. Ladies and gentlemen, who else cleans their meat before cooking? And what do you use, if you don't use lemon or vinegar, what do you use? Let me know, I'd love to try it out. The goat meat has been thoroughly washed and cleaned, and now I'm gonna go ahead and season it. So what I'm going to do is just sprinkle some all-purpose seasoning onto the goat meat. So I have here Goya adobo seasoning, very tasty. I also will use a little bit of Old Bay seasoning salts. And then I won't use a lot of seasoning because when I do blend the produce, that's the green bell peppers, the onions, the garlic and ginger, I will add a crayfish Maggi cube into that as well. And again, that will be divided between the goat meat and the stew base as well. So once I've seasoned the meat, I will then go in and thoroughly massage the seasoning onto the goat meat, okay? And then I will wait for another 2 minutes for the produce to finish broiling in the oven, blend it up, add this to the goat meat and steam it. And the importance of the goat meat and having the broth from the goat is that's what you are going to add when you are preparing the stew for the jollof. So this is a very, very important piece. I'm using goat meat today. However, you can use whatever meat, whether it be chicken, whatever meat you use, just make sure you keep the broth because it gives your stew an amazing flavor. This is what the produce looks like once it's broiled in the oven. Now, because I mentioned earlier that I will be using this for both of my goat meat and the jollof stew, I'm gonna double the portion. So I'm gonna do this again, and again, same portions. So 1 whole onion, 1 habanero pepper, 1/4 piece of the red bell pepper and the green pepper, and a little bit of ginger and garlic as well too, okay? So the same amount twice for this recipe. And so now you're going to place the produce into the blender and you are going to blend it for about 1 minute. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to break apart the Maggi cube and add it into the blend. Produce with the Maggi cube has now been added. So this will cook on high heat for about 30 minutes. So make sure you consistently watch the stove because what happens is that when it cooks for long, the juices will evaporate, and the juices are very, very important as that's what's going to give your stew a distinctive taste. So keep an eye on it, save the broth. So we'll check back on this in 30 minutes. So the goat meat has been thoroughly cooked. And now I am going to deep fry the meat on a medium-high setting. And what I do is I carefully place the goat meat in the hot oil, or else it'll splatter all over you, and you don't want that because it's very painful. So as I pour in the goat meat into the oil, I just make sure I separate them and spread them around, and I fry them on each side for about 5 minutes on this setting here. Okay, so it has now been about 10 minutes of frying the goat meat on each side, and you can see the end result here. So what you are going to do is you're going to pour the goat meat broth that you used to boil the meat initially to give your goat meat a nice flavor and to make it also wet, so that way the suya powder that you see me pouring over top here gets coated very well. Prior to this, the oil that you used, make sure you preserve that oil because that's what you are going to use when you are creating the stew for your jollof rice. Now, as you can see, I'm mixing in the suya powder, and you can just see how nicely coated the goat meat is. Then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the produce that I chopped up earlier, and I'm just going to then spread it around the goat meat, as you can see that I'm doing in the video. So you're going to take the produce, you see here the onions, the bell peppers, and you just sprinkle it aside, and then you add some more suya powder to garnish the suya meat. And then afterwards you are going to set this aside, and then I will go ahead and show you how I finalize the plating from here. Okay, so now it's time for the final plating. So as you can see, this is the same suya goat that I garnished and seasoned up with the suya powder in the frying pan. It's just transferred over. And so you're just going to pretty much repeat the process here. So you can see I'm using the chopped up red onions, the green bell peppers, and the red bell peppers. And I'm just nicely garnishing my plate for the presentation. And then afterwards, I'm going to get the suya powder again, as you can see here, and then just sprinkle it over. Again, it's up to your preference if you want it really, really coated. Also, you have to be mindful that it can be very spicy as well. So just go ahead and do your preference. And this is the final result of the plate. So now the sliced stewed tomatoes are all thoroughly cooked. There's absolutely no water, as you can see here. So we're gonna go ahead and start the stew for the stovetop jollof. But before I begin, I want to discuss the importance of using a wooden spoon. This wooden spoon is what helps prevent your rice from becoming mushy, or as my mom would say, peche, okay? So when you start the stew process, use a wooden spoon so that way you don't forget. This wooden spoon is a lifesaver, and it took me so long to figure it out. So I'm helping you out today by using this wooden spoon. Write a comment below if you already knew about the wooden spoon and you've been using it, or you had no idea and today's your first day learning about this trick. Okay, so now it's time for you to make your stew. So what I used for this recipe is 1/3 cup of oil. Now, I already have a cup of oil in there already from the goat meat that I fried. And it's always best to use the same oil that you used to fry the goat meat or whatever meat you used for your stew. Another trick I've learned along the way, aside from using the wooden spoon, is when you are making your jollof rice to use like a cast iron pot. So I'm gonna go ahead right now, as the oil is hot, I'm going to add in my onions that I previously sliced. Okay, I'm gonna dump it all in there. And then remember as I mentioned, you have to consistently use the wooden spoon. So what you wanna do is just put these onions, let it fire up on the stove for about 10 minutes when they start browning. And then you are going to add in a little bit of curry powder and nutmeg as well. So we will come back to check in on our onions in the next 10 minutes. Now the onions have become translucent and they are cooked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a bit of curry powder. Okay. And the same amount of nutmeg as well too. Just sprinkle a little bit. Okay. Here again is optional, is where you can also add in bay leaves as well. Okay, so I added in the curry powder and nutmeg. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add 1 whole can of tomato paste, okay? For this recipe, you will need 1 whole can. Now, I don't like to add any excess water at this point because it just makes the process very long. So I make sure I thoroughly clean out the can. And I know sometimes my mom is like, seriously, Barbara, like make sure you take out every single thing, all the tomatoes out, and that's what I do as well, because you don't want to waste anything as well too, okay? So I have the 1 full can of tomato paste in here, and then I'm going to bring down my stove from high heat to now medium heat, because what happens is that tomatoes easily burns. At this point, your tomatoes will burn, your onions will burn as well, and then your your stew will then have a really burnt taste, and you do not want that, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this thoroughly cook for 10 minutes. Barbara, when do you know that the tomato paste has fully cooked? 3 indicators. 1, the oil will rise to the top. 2, the tomato paste will become extremely dark. 3, that sour, bitter taste goes away. That's my 3 indicators that the tomato paste is ready. And once the tomato paste is thoroughly cooked, I then add in the broth. Do you recall the produce broth that I initially blended and I used for the goat meat? I will then add that into the stew. So I absolutely would love to shout out Mercy Cookware. I am cooking with the Obapa set, and I absolutely love Mercy Cookware because not only are they pretty jewels, but the longevity of these products is outstanding. I've been using these same cookware for the past 6 years, and I'm just loving it. Lots of variety and options as well, and the brand is called Mercy Cookware. And that bitter sour taste is eliminated. So what I'm going to now do as well is add in the produce broth. Okay, let that also cook. Let that also cook for 10 minutes. And then add in the goat broth. The broth has thoroughly cooked, and now I'm going to add in the thoroughly cooked sliced stew canned tomatoes. So because this is already cooked as well too, this is another 10 minutes. Make sure you thoroughly add everything all inside, okay? This will be for another 10 minutes. And then I'm going to explain the salt process, okay? And then we will wash our rice and add it in. So now it has been 10 minutes and the stew has been thoroughly cooked. Again, it is now a deep red color. The oil has risen to the top. The stew is good to go now. And now after I stir it, I'm going to add the Onga red stew seasoning powder, as well as the Onga classic seasoning powder. Put them in simultaneously and then mix them. Okay, so this is one thing that I want to share is that you have to be very generous when you are using salt for jollof. Because the rice expands, you end up losing taste and flavor. So you may think I'm using a lot of salt for this dish and the stew may be too salty, but that is incorrect. The more salt you add, the tastier your jollof will be. So we are going to add our rice. Remember, you need to use 5 cups for this recipe, and please ensure that you wash your rice before pouring it into the stew. So now it's the fun part. Yay! So now I'm going to pour in the jasmine rice into the jollof stew. And prior to that, as you can see, I used a strainer. Now the reason why I'm using a strainer is because I don't want to have any excess water going into the stew, because as I mentioned earlier, it'll just make the entire cooking process very slow. So what I like to do is I like to pour in 2 cups of rice at a time, and I take my time when I'm stirring in the rice in the stew. 2 reasons. 1, because it can cause breakage, and 2, your rice will end up looking like couscous and you do not want that. So just put in, if you want 1 cup at a time, 2 cups at a time, it's up to you. Please make sure you use a wooden spoon and stir very, very carefully, and make sure you go all the way to the bottom, so that way you're getting everything in, and that way the stew is also being mixed thoroughly and it spreads out evenly to ensure that your jollof rice is tasting extra delicious. So the 5 cups have been added into the stew, and now what you are going to do is you're going to place your stove on a very low setting, and you are going to use parchment paper to cook the jollof rice. Now, before placing the lid, the parchment paper helps trap the steam. The rice then begins to fry itself for the first 20 minutes, and this helps reduce the amount of water that you add into your rice when you're cooking the rice. So it has now been the first 20 minutes. Let's just take a look to see what our rice is looking like. So you can see that the oil has risen to the top, and that's an indicator that your rice is starting to fry itself. Make sure you grab your wooden spoon, and then you're going to stir your rice, and you want to be very careful. So you want to first of all make sure you're stirring it all the way to the bottom, and just make sure that when you are stirring your rice that you do not cause any breakage. Again, we do not want this to look like couscous. After this, ensure your stove is on a low setting, and after the first 20 minutes we're gonna come back and check in on the jollof rice in the next 40 minutes. So make sure you take your parchment paper, you close the rice, and you cover it with the lid, and then we'll check back on it. Okay, so it has now been 40 minutes. I'm going to lift up the parchment paper, and we can absolutely see here that the jollof rice is cooking. The rice is beginning to expand. It's starting to look a lot like jollof rice. Yay! So I'm going to get my wooden spoon, and I'm going to thoroughly but carefully stir the rice because I don't want any breakage. Now you are going to have to be careful here because you don't want to dig in too deep, because you might scrape the burns in the bottom and that can mix into your pot. So I'm just going to add here just a little bit of water, just a 1/4 cup of water, just to help with the cooking process here as well too, and just to soften up the rice a bit. So we'll check in on this rice again in another 40 minutes. Okay, 40 minutes has now been up. Let's take a look to see our jollof rice. The parchment paper is now removed, and the jollof rice has now been thoroughly cooked. So I'm just going to grab the spoon to show you what it looks like. So my rice is still, as my mom would call it, 1-1, single long grain portions. Everything is thoroughly cooked, and we are good to go. So now we are going to make the Ghana salad. It is so easy. So what I have here is chopped romaine lettuce, Roma tomatoes, cucumbers, shredded carrots, and eggs, hard-boiled cooked eggs. I just want to assure you everything has been thoroughly washed. So essentially what it is like layering a lasagna. So before setting the salad, the other ingredients that you have to use when making a Ghana salad is your baked beans, corned beef, salad cream, and some ketchup. And all of these items you can get at your local grocery store. I take the romaine lettuce and I layer it here. Now this is just for my family. Small size, like making a lasagna. I add my cucumbers, and then I just drizzle on some tomatoes, and I add some shredded carrots. Oops, I made a mess there. And then I add some sliced eggs. So like the eggs that obviously don't look the best, like would go at the bottom of like the salad. Okay, and then what I would do next is I add the baked beans, corned beef as well too. Okay, you just grab some corned beef and sprinkle it onto the salad like this. And then I would grab some of the beans. I don't want much of that liquid, so I'll try to like strain it out. And then just I have no idea how amazing this tastes. This is the Ghanaian style salad. And here is the final plating. Thank you for watching today's episode on Sunday Cooking with Barbara and Kansa. I really hope that you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making this video and showcasing the step-by-step tutorial. Don't forget to look out for the other episode every other Sunday from my house to yours. Have yourself a fantastic day.